Bill Taylor is co-founder and founding editor of Fast Company. Bill is also a best-selling author, speaker, and entrepreneur who chronicles the best ways to compete, innovate, and succeed. He has written 3 books on leadership and change. His new book, Simply Brilliant, was published in September. Please welcome Bill Taylor.
CEO Summit and to listen in on the conversation today. I took tons and tons of notes. It's been a really spirited day. Look, I know this event is all about the future of the many companies and community organizations in the room and your roles as leaders helping to build that future. But let me start with a quick trip to the past. As you just heard, I'm the co-founder of Fast Company magazine. Much to my amazement, this makes me feel old, we just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the launch of Fast Company, so I've been thinking a lot about the early days. And as it turns out, at the very beginning of the magazine, right after we published our first issue, we organized a big summit of our own around the question, how do you overthrow a successful company? Now, it wasn't a gathering of young internet hotshots eager to take on the business establishment. Those were the days. It was a gathering of executives and strategists and technologists from companies that had been around for decades. Companies that had lots to be proud of, but who sensed that there were massive shifts in the air and who were determined to reckon with those shifts and rethink and reimagine every aspect of how they did business and delivered results. It was 1996. And here we are 20 years later, and as I listen in on the conversation today, starting with Patrick's remarks this morning, it strikes me that many of you in this room are wrestling with that same question. And that's because the work of making deep-seated, meaningful change, building on all your past success, even as you build out a whole new point of view about the future, really has become the defining work of our time. That, I would submit to you, is what it means to be a leader today. That's the work all of you have signed up to do. And that's what I want to talk about really briefly this afternoon, to offer a set of ideas and tell a few stories drawn from my new book about what it takes to do something important and build something great in all sorts of industries and in all walks of life. Specifically, I want to talk to you about competition and the power of ideas. Do you have a definition of success for your business that allows you to stand for something special and inspires others to stand with you? Customers, in the impact of your people and your culture, do you and your colleagues behave as memorably as you compete? And do those behaviors create something meaningful? Leadership, really your individual leadership, and a genuine commitment to creativity and change. Are you determined to make sure that what you know doesn't limit what you can imagine going forward? Are you learning as fast as the world is changing? So let's start with how you compete. And this, to me, is what really makes business so different today. We are living in a world where ordinary is not an option. You can't do big things anymore. If you're content with doing things a little bit better than everybody else or a little bit differently than how you've done them in the past. In an era of hyper competition and nonstop disruption, that's all what we've been hearing about today. The only way to stand out from the crowd is to do something genuinely special. The goal is no longer to be the best at what lots of other people already do. It's to be the only one who does what you do. What do you promise that nobody else can promise? What do you deliver that only you can deliver? What are you the most of in your business? And how do you become even more than that? Let me show you what I mean. One little story, one little case study, one of my most surprisingly entertaining research visits I've done in a while. to a company that has won big in its market by fundamentally rethinking and reimagining what's possible. It's a community bank in the Pacific Northwest called Umpqua Bank. A guy named Ray Davis took over about 20 years ago, about when we were starting Fast Company. To be honest, I've been tracking him for much of that time. He took over Umpqua. It was this pipsqueak little plain vanilla community bank, 6 branches in and around downtown Portland, $140 million of deposits, publicly traded, weirdly enough being so tiny, market cap of $20 million. It was like an asterisk in the financial scene. Fast forward to today, 400 branches from San Diego in the south to Seattle in the north, $14 billion of deposits, and a market cap that last time I checked crossed $4 billion. It's one of the great growth stories in community banking in the company. And by the way, it's also a genuine passion brand, lifestyle brand, call it whatever you want. It's got a really distinctive and compelling presence up and down the west coast of the United States. How'd they do it? They did it by saying, you know what, we're going to take this kind of ordinary business and we're going to do something extraordinary with it. They set themselves a challenge. This was 20 years ago when the whole retail experience was a big deal. How do we reinvent the retail experience so that our banks can appeal to all 5 human senses? That was the explicit question they asked. The sense of sight. What could a bank look like in this day and age? And so next time you're out in the West Coast, find the local Umpqua bank. They look pretty unusual. There's kind of a vibe of kind of a Starbucks on steroids meeting an innovation lab of the sort you'd find at Steelcase. So very bohemian, very funky, but also very high tech and very cutting edge. And oh, by the way, each of the locations looks a little bit different from every other one based on the city and the neighborhood of the city in which it operates. It wants each of its locations to have what it calls a community narrative. It wants it to be of the area in which it exists. So I was giving a talk in Seattle maybe 6 months ago in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. That's the very affluent, also very bohemian part of town. Those two things often go together these days. And it's where Kurt Cobain was born, in Nirvana and grunge rock grew up. It's where Sir Mix-a-Lot and some of early hip hop come of age. And you walk into that branch and it's kind of an homage to that culture. There's not the sort of the oil painting with the monocle of our founder. It's a poster of Kurt Cobain. It's a quote from Sir Mix-a-Lot. I don't know a lot of banks that are kind of riffing on grunge and hip hop and how they decorate their stuff. What's a bank smell like? Smell is one of the 5 senses. I'm from Boston. We're still digging out of the financial crisis to some degree. You walk into a bank in Boston, it's kind of the smell of fear, agitation, perspiration. I'm a little behind on my mortgages. Am I going to get a knock on the door type of deal? You walk into an Umpqua bank, it's the Pacific Northwest, it's the smell of coffee. They built this tremendous coffee culture around everything they do with their banks. In the early days, you'd look at the tellers, and by all the tellers, there would be lovely cappuccino machines. And all the tellers were also trained as baristas, only in the Pacific Northwest, and you're waiting in line, and they would brew you a double espresso, a cappuccino. Now in the world of Nespresso and all these fancy machines, it's all automated and so on, but they still love coffee. In fact, to this day, you can walk in, they will sell you for $13.50 a pound, a 1-pound bag of Umpqua blend coffee. Costa Rica, fair trade, organic. They're very, very proud of it. What's a bank taste like? Taste is one of the 5 senses. Every transaction at Umpqua, you go inside to use an ATM, deposit a check, talk to a loan officer. At some point, someone from the team will approach you literally on a silver platter made by Tiffany with a lovely assortment of chocolates made just for them by this really neat company, Moonstruck Chocolate, different shapes and sizes, Umpqua logo on the front, sort of images of the city on the back. And it was this incredibly robust retail experience. The look, the coffee, the chocolate, simple little things, but it totally changed people's expectations of what visiting a bank can do. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people move their money to Umpqua, and millions and tens of millions and billions of dollars of deposits flowed in. Now, 4 or 5 years ago, they said a couple of things. Number one, everything is going mobile and so on, and so we have to be really great in terms of our technology, but we've built this retail presence that we think really counts for a lot. So What are we going to do about that? Secondly, we are by definition a community bank. And in this day and age, think about 2008, 2009, all of the misery, all of the heartache. What does it mean to be a community bank today? And they said, here's the idea. We close at 5 o'clock like every other community bank we know. But why should we padlock the doors when we stop being a bank? We close at 5 o'clock. Let's open the doors at 5:01 p.m. and have these beautiful facilities not be banks, but community centers. And so they developed for each location an internet reservation system. And if you're running the neighborhood chamber of commerce in a neighborhood in Seattle, yeah, you can go meet at the YMCA, but it's kind of old school. Come to the bank. We've got the big screen. We've got projectors. You can have a really crisp professional meeting. You're a group of moms having a monthly book club and you read Jane Eyre or whatever it may be. You can keep meeting at Nancy's house, but she's got the bratty kids and the dog is always jumping over on the sofa. Forget that. Come meet at the bank. Make your monthly reservation. We'll have the coffee on for you. We'll have the chocolates out for you. They've got their ultimate flagship store in downtown Portland, and you got to know Portland culture. Watch that show Portlandia on ISC to appreciate this. By far, the most popular club that meets at the bank in downtown Portland is what's called the Stitch and Bitch Club. People come and knit and complain about their husbands or their wives or their spouses. And you have this image of these it's a lot of millennials, like these 25-year-old kids in the knit caps and the nose rings, very angrily knitting away in a bank. And you ask yourself, why do they bother? And by the way, I'm going to ask that of Patrick after today, but why are they trying so hard to stand out so much in the field? And they bother because they want to change the conversation with their customers about the role a bank can play. If all you care about is, I want the highest possible rate of interest on my 6-month CD, I want the lowest rate of interest on my 5-year car loan, they're not the bank for you. It doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make them a bad bank. But if you're the kind of person who says, look, I've got to have a financial institution in my life, and it'd be kind of nice to have an institution where every time I encounter it, whether it's in person or online, every time I encounter it, it does something interesting, something I wasn't expecting, something engaging. By the way, they want to change the conversation with the community about the role a community bank can play in the community. You go to ask anybody at Umpqua, what are you people up to here? What's going on? They have this kind of mantra. We constantly surprise the world by what a bank can do and the role a bank can play in our customers' lives. Now, everybody's got their mission statement, but to me what's interesting about that, it's a permission slip to keep experimenting, keep making small bets, keep trying new things to deepen the sense of engagement between this company and its customers. And that, I would submit to you, really is where strategy begins today. The only sustainable form of business leadership is thought leadership. And so when you're at an event like this and you're getting all this stuff about technology and drones and software and all that kind of stuff, every so often, give yourself permission to set aside the market segments around which you're building the business or all the pressures that are bearing down on the business and ask yourselves, what are the small number of ideas that really define how we do business and that distinguish us from how everybody else in our field does business? That's really where success starts today. Let me put it a little bit differently. With all of the problems and perils in the world, and someone, I think it was one of the questions this morning, most of us spend most of our time wrestling with that age-old business question, what keeps you up at night? What are the problems and worries that nag at you? But I'm convinced that the much more important question, especially for your colleagues back home, isn't what keeps you up at night, but what gets you up in the morning? What makes you and your colleagues more determined than ever, more excited than ever, and maybe most importantly, more confident than ever in a world which just about every day feels more confusing, more uncertain, more worrisome than ever. And I got to tell you, that's a lesson I've learned kind of the hard way over the last 20 years at Fast Company. Yeah, the most successful companies really do think differently from everybody else. We've heard a lot about that today. But I really believe that the most successful organizations, it's going to sound a little simple, but sometimes simple stuff is the most powerful. The most successful organizations genuinely do care more than everybody else about customers, about colleagues, about how the whole organization conducts itself in a world with so many opportunities every single day to cut corners and compromise on values. You can't be special, distinctive, compelling in the marketplace unless you first build something special, distinctive, compelling in the workplace. Your strategy or your brand is really ultimately not much more than the outward expression of your culture. Your culture really is the only platform over the long term that can sustain your strategy and your brand in a world that is changing as fast as ours is. Now, quick story, one of my favorite case studies from the new book. It's lunch, so it's in the spirit of lunch. It's a food company. It's in the spirit of Domino's. I was just there a couple of weeks ago on the book tour. It's a company by the name of Pal's Sudden Service. I can't imagine any of you here have heard of it. It's a burger, Patrick knows it, burger, fries, shakes, hot dogs joint in northeastern Tennessee, southwestern Virginia. And you go down to that part of the world, the Tri-City region of Tennessee, and this is a insanely passionate brand. You mention Pal's to anybody and they drop to their knees and start weeping, and the food is so great, and all that kind of stuff. And I got to tell you, it really is a tremendously successful company. It's very whimsical. The stores are fun to look at and so on. But here's what makes Pal's truly extraordinary in the kind of ordinary world of selling burgers and fries and shakes. There's no indoor seating at a Pal's restaurant. It's all drive-through. You either take it with you and drive off, or they have outdoor seating if it's a nice day you want to eat at a picnic table. And here's how it works. You drive up, someone physically leans out the window, takes your order. They guarantee that the process of taking that order will take no longer on average than 18 seconds. You can imagine a car full of kids at a family from a soccer practice with the dog barking and 3 or 4 kids. They will take down that order in 18 seconds. That's 4 times faster than the second best restaurant in that space. You then drive around, your food will be waiting. They will hand you that bag of food, and you will have to wait no longer than 12 seconds. This is unthinkable in that industry sector. Now, you would think they're taking your, by the way, that's why it's called Pal's Sudden Service. It's not just fast food, it's sudden food. It's like, there it is. You would think if they're taking orders that quickly, and they're giving them to you that quickly, that, good, it's fast. The trouble is it's totally riddled with errors, and you gave me the food that was for the car behind me, or I said 3 cheeseburgers, you gave me 3 hamburgers, whatever it could be. Pal's makes a mistake once every 3,600 orders. It is about as close to flawless as you can get. That is 10 times more accurate than the second most accurate fast food chain in that business. Now, it's kind of, it's burgers and fries, I grant you, but it's kind of a big deal. So much so that a few years ago, Pal's actually won the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. This is the highest award for quality in the country. Previous years, Cadillac, FedEx, Ritz-Carlton, and then Pal's Sudden Service in Kingsport, Tennessee. How do they attain that level of performance? It really isn't about technology. It is, in a fundamental way, all about humanity. This company understood in its bones, and as it grows, it's got to be really disciplined about this, that if they want to actually deliver on what they promise to the marketplace, they've got to be fanatics about what they're building in the workplace. So they are crazed about how they hire, how they promote, how they evaluate talent. In an industry, your image of folks who work in this kind of slightly dazed kids who don't make eye contact and kind of do what they're going to do kind of deal. They say, we want to populate our stores with absolute superstars. How do you do that? You look at the people, say, who are our superstars right now? Let's hire a bunch of psychologists to interview them and figure out what makes the really best people in our places tick. And let's go find people who think that same way. And so they've got this 60-question kind of psychometric battery of questions. And it does an amazingly good job of figuring out what kind of person is going to thrive in the PALS environment. Second thing is, once they bring these people in, they train them like crazy. You've got to go through 120 hours of training and be certified in 6 to 8 different jobs before you can actually work at PALS and engage with customers and so on. But that's not where it ends. Their theory is, look, we train you in November and you're doing a great job, but by February or March, you've gotten into some bad habits, your skills are eroding and all that kind of stuff. And so every single day, on every single shift at PALS, let's say 15 or 20 people show up at work for the restaurant, when you walk in the door, the computer spits out that day the names of 2 or 3 people who are going to get a pop quiz on one of the jobs they're certified in doing. And if you pass the pop quiz, off you go about your business. If you don't pass the pop quiz, you can't do that job until you get trained back up. And it's not, by the way, this is not punitive. Nobody comes and wraps your knuckles. It's just, their theory is, look, we're human beings. We fall out of calibration like everything else in the world falls out of calibration. And we have to be in the business of constant upgrade, reminder, renewal. And Patrick talked about teaching a class at risk. Here's what really struck me about PALS. PALS, more than just about any company I know, deeply believes that if you're a leader at this company at any level, you also have to be a teacher. And so one of the deals is, once you achieve a leadership position at PALS, you have to explicitly commit to spending 10% of your time teaching your colleagues about the business, their job, the future, whatever the case may be. And you actually have to show up for work every single day with the name of one person and the one thing you are going to teach that person that day. It is an absolutely inviolable requirement of being a leader at PALS. The other thing is, this is the only company I know, I'm sure there are others, but the only one I know in the fast food that has a master reading list. They have 21 books that once you get promoted to a level of management, you have to, over a period of time, you don't go out on some crash course for what, over a period of time, you have to read and really understand. And some of them are, Joe Duran on quality and all that kind of stuff. But one of them is Machiavelli, The Prince. One of them is Sun Tzu, The Art of War. One of them is Max De Pree, Orbiting the Giant Hairball, one of their really sort of out there books on creativity and stuff, written by a great person from Michigan. And Tom Crosby, the CEO, actually has a CEO book club. Every other Monday, he calls upon 5 managers, leaders up and down the ranks, and they say, okay, we're going to read this book for my book club. We're going to spend an hour, and we're going to talk about what you thought was meaningful in the book, what it meant to you, what your takeaways are for the company, and all that kind of, and really, I don't know a lot of CEOs who are having book clubs every couple of weeks with people up and down the ranks of their leadership team, but to me, this really is, and it's going to sound weird, it's one of the more thoughtful and even kind of intellectual companies I've come across in a long time, and they sell burgers and fries. And to me, the question for all of you, just like it is at PALS, is once you've figured out what makes us special in the marketplace, you immediately have to figure out what does that mean for what we're building in the workplace. And I don't mean foosball tables or casual Friday or anything. I mean, what does it mean to be a member of this organization? What are the kinds of commitments we're making to one another as fellow leaders or from our leadership positions down in the ranks about, this is how we make decisions around here. This is how we share information around here. This is how we jump in to help solve other people's problems, because we understand what we're trying to do for our customers, and that means we have to do things for each other as colleagues. This is more than just a company, it's a cause. And that sense of belonging, that almost tribal sense of these are the commitments we make to one another about the behaviors that define what it means to be a member of this enterprise going forward. That to me is what culture is all about. And that to me, even with companies with lots of great technology, lots of hot products, that's often where I fear lots of organizations fall down. But let's face it, most companies in most industries have a kind of tunnel vision. Everybody is chasing after the same things everybody is chasing after. Everybody is missing opportunities that are hidden in plain sight if only they could look at the world a little bit differently. I've come to think of it as the paradox of expertise. The more you know about something, the better at it you've gotten. The longer you've been doing it, the more successful your company is. Oftentimes, the harder it becomes, without ever intending it, the harder it becomes to open your eyes to new ways of solving old problems, new ways of connecting with different sets of customers, new ways of rethinking and reimagining what's possible in your business. Without ever intending it, we allow what we know and all that hard-won experience gained over years or decades to limit what we can imagine, which is why the best leaders I know challenge themselves to become the most insatiable learners. One last really quick story, then we're going to have a little dialogue on stage and invite some questions. Another fun story from my new book, again, really ordinary kind of business doing pretty extraordinary things, is the company WD-40. I'm sure everybody here has got a can, the blue and yellow can under their kitchen sink or in the garage or what have you. Guy named Gary Ridges, complete wild man, Australian guy, takes over about 15 years ago. And WD-40 is both an iconic company and brand and a really troubled company and brand. It basically has this one product. Good news is everybody knows it. It's already in 4 out of 5 households in the United States, either in the kitchen or in the garage or in the workshop, but pretty much their business is restricted to the United States. In fact, they had so few ideas about what else they could be doing that they're a publicly traded company. They would literally take 100% of their profit every year and give it back to stockholders in the form of a dividend. Now, that's kind of nice if you want to have a safe stock and own something that's more like a bond than a stock, but it's really no way to have a growth company or do anything interesting. This was literally an organization where what it knew was totally limiting what it could imagine. And Gary came in and said, this is insane. This is no way to run a company. By the way, fast forward to today, they're in 176 countries. They've got this incredibly wide array of specialized products, new and related products. The stock, it ain't Domino's, but the stock has been on an absolute tear, up 300% in the last 5 years. Just relative to anything before, it's just a whole new lease on life kind of deal. How'd they do it? He didn't do it with savvy M&A. He didn't do it with incremental little product extensions. I really don't know. We just talked about leaders being teachers. In this case, I don't know of any CIO I've met who is more obsessed with the idea of leaders as learners. What he said to the group is, you know what? One reason we don't know, and we came up in one of the panels, we don't know very much about the world. We don't know much about, how can we not be booming business in Asia, but we don't know much about Asia? How can we not be in all sorts of aerospace? We're born from the aerospace industry, but how can we not be in all kinds of industries that we're not in already? He said, we are going to build a culture and a company of learners. And instead, he's from Australia. He's one of these really outsized personalities. He says, I want to build a company of quote unquote learning maniacs. And he has everybody take this maniac pledge and they put it on the card they care about. I commit myself to having new experiences, visiting new places, encountering new technologies, and sharing what I know and sharing what I learn and sharing what I need to know with all of my fellow leaders and executives. He also, so that was more about this cultural thing. With the problem in here is we're not curious enough. And we're going to make this company grow by making ourselves more curious. Then this other thing, which I think is kind of interesting, maybe as a literal thing, but at the very least as a metaphor. He said, look, one of the reasons we've been so slow to innovate, other than just being insular, is we've allowed ourselves to fall prey to a phenomenon I think everybody in this room can relate to, which is it's really hard to ask people who are responsible for delivering results in the present to also be able to imagine an entirely new future. Because what feels urgent always crowds out what is truly important. I know I should be thinking about how do we crack the automobile market in China, but I got all these emails to return. And I hired this person 5 months ago, and he's a total pain in the ass. I got to figure out how to fire him before he drives crazy. Or we've got this flare-up with a customer here, and I know I should be thinking about my customers in China, but I'm dealing with one of my customers in San Diego. And we just allow the fires and the kind of dead hand of the present to crowd out our capacity to imagine the future. So he decided to say, you know what? I'm going to create what he called Team Tomorrow. Took 5 or 6 people. He said, this is not a formal R&D unit. It's not our innovation lab. You are a kind of flying wedge of creativity, innovation, and learning. Took some technologists, some branding people, some finance people, said you got 2 or 3 years. And I want you to spend all of that time, forget about the present, think only about where this company needs to be in 5 years, and then in 10 years. What markets do we need to be in? What industries do we need to be in? What's the right organizations? They started a lot of standalone companies. They've got a company, WD-40, just for motorcycles and bicycles. And what's the right new organizational form? And this team tomorrow just felt so liberated by not having to wrestle with the realities of the present anymore. They became a kind of a catalyst, a jumpstart for innovation at this company. Now, I don't necessarily think everybody should go create Team Tomorrows or anything, but to me, if nothing else as a metaphor, it's pretty compelling. And I think what he tumbled on, I mean, WD-40 has always been kind of interesting. It's fun to have this iconic, all-American brand. But what he understood is that he had to help his colleagues become more interested in new ideas, interested in new markets, interested in the enduring mission of the enterprise, and in all new ways to bring that mission to life. And to me, it's kind of a neat, as I say, if nothing else, a metaphor to think about what does it really mean as a leader if you say to yourself, I need to be learning as fast as the world is changing. In fact, again, what CEOs signal mean a lot. When he sends an email to anybody inside the company, or frankly, outside the company, I get him when he sends emails to me, his signature quote is, Ancora imparo, which Michelangelo used to, not in his emails, but used to write in his painting. It means, I am still learning. And he wants that to be his slogan, if you will, to everybody he interacts with at the company. Every time he's in a meeting with his colleagues, the last question he asks, and they know it's coming, again, it's just a reminder. It's like kind of why we go to church. It's not like you're going to learn all that new, but you're kind of always being reminded about what matters. He'll turn to his colleagues and say, when's the last time you did something for the first time? And again, it's just another call to action, to find ways to live your lives, to make room for going to conferences you don't feel comfortable at or visiting a place you never, just to keep your own growth and leadership and learning alive. I mean, ultimately, the job today, the job for all of you, the job for everyone, isn't just to out-muscle or out-hustle the competition. It's to outthink the competition every single day. And if you can say to yourself, you know what? I'm getting the best ideas from the widest variety of places. I'm putting myself in a position to keep learning as fast as the world is changing. Then I think you've got a real shot at outthinking the competition. So thanks for your attention. Thanks for bringing me to Detroit. Good luck as you invent the future of your company in this state. Thank you. I'm sticking around, people.
Please welcome our moderator, Stephen Henderson, editorial page editor, Detroit Free Press.
Great speech. Okay, I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then, of course, the audience is going to be able to ask questions. If you have a question, text BLM CEO to 22333, and once you join, then text your message, and I'll get it right here, and then I can read it. My first question is about the thread that I guess I see through all of the stories you just told. I think the obvious thread is sort of cool, right? These are companies that are doing really cool things, but I think the more important thread, perhaps, is connection. These are companies where leadership is connecting with the employees.
Yep.
And these are companies where the entire company is connecting with customers and with their communities.
Yep.
Talk about that as the thing that you identify as being what makes a fast company, I guess.
Well, that's a good thread. That's insightful of you. I'd say a couple things. From the perspective of leadership, I think we've really made a big shift in the last 15 or 20 years in what it means to be a leader and the kind of skill set and outlook you need. And 15 or 20 years ago, the idea was if you're the CEO, if you're running the CFO, you're running a business unit, you're running a team, you are kind of the smartest person in the room. And if there's a problem to be solved, you solved it. If there's an opportunity to be identified, you identified. And a lot of people say, oh, I've got this great idea. What's my style of communication to push it through the ranks? And let's get everybody on board. The world's too complicated now. The problems are too big. The opportunities are too vast. To me, the new question for leaders is, what does it mean to be a leader in a world where nobody alone can possibly be as smart as everybody together? And that goes to the connection thing. And so I borrow a phrase from open source software called architecture of participation. And to me, the really best leaders I know, they have genuine personal strength. I mean, people want to be led by, all right, no political editorializing. People in companies want to be led by people whose values they admire, whose behaviors map to the behaviors they claim for the rest. So there is still a tremendous place, I think, for leaders modeling the kind of behavior and commitments and values that we all hope to see. But I think the new secret of leadership is genuine intellectual humility. One way or another, you have to be able to tell your folks, if you think my job is to solve every problem we have, my job is to identify every opportunity we need to identify, you are sorely mistaken. Maybe Bill Gates can do that. Maybe Steve Jobs could have done that. Requires a business superhero. So it is all about the hard work, and it is hard work of creating an architecture of participation where colleagues together can see things that the individual leader, no matter how talented, could see on his or her own. As far as customers go, and the CEO of Steelcase was making this point, I've always been amazed that once you bring something into the world, a new product, a new service, a new experience or venue like Umpqua Bank, people will always surprise you by what they do with that. And it's often really hard to predict what parts of what you're offering are going to click most with customers, what they're going to do with what you're offering. And so I think there is this sense of ultimately we are all in the business of co-creating with I never thought that would be what really took off. I never thought that's how they would use Thursday nights at the Umpqua Bank kind of deal. So this spirit of we're going to put a bunch of stuff into the world, but ultimately what we're doing is co-creating what really resonates and what's really meaningful with our customers. I think that's another kind of new part of business, and it really does have to do with connection.
Yeah, the community part of that is also super important. Not to get political, but businesses are members of their community, and maybe they aren't people. We're going to debate that later, but they are citizens.
Yep.
They are part of these communities they live in, and they have to behave that way in order to be successful.
So I'd say a couple really quick things. Doug talked this morning about how, business is no longer primarily about price; it's about a lot more stuff, and I totally agree with that. And those of us who went to business school, I'm a recovering MBA. Those of us who went to business school, one of the first things you learn about is the economic value proposition: cost, quality, features, reliability, all that kind of stuff. I think in a world where, at this point, most companies in most fields are reasonably competent at what they do, or they would have been wiped out a long time ago, we're really now in the age of the human values proposition. It's not just being affordable or reliable. It's about being memorable and meaningful to encounter. And I think, in more and more fields, it is more and more the case that people want to do business with brands and organizations who they really, one way or another, share their values or see things in the world that they also see and that they also care about. And so, and again, that's why I think something like an Umpqua is interesting. Their version of being part of the community isn't we're going to fund the Little League uniforms or, be up on they may do that too, be up on the banner at the local turkey trot. It's actually insinuating yourselves into the community so that you become part of the fabric. And it's no longer even surprising that the local Chamber of Commerce or book clubs or bookstores go and have these tremendous book readings with kids in the banks. And it's just, they've weaved themselves into the fabric of the community. So I think that phenomenon of brands and companies having meaning above and beyond the narrow market in which they serve and doing it in ways that are more than their traditional, I'm going to write a check kind of deal and be done with that, is, I think, where many parts of the world are going.
Yeah. Okay, we got lots of great questions
Oh,
here.
good.
Right here, right now, envision a fast company definition for Michigan.
So,
Easy question.
yes, a fast. Here, so I actually spent a little bit of time in Michigan. I'll do a few shout outs. My new book, and please, they're at your table. I'm marketing it as the non-prescription alternative to Ambien. So if you're on a plane, you can't sleep, 5 pages are out like a light. No side effects. You won't be sleepwalking and binge eating as you sometimes do with Ambien. But please enjoy the book. One of the really fun case studies I write in the book is Quicken Loans, and I had the really eye-opening experience of going to one of their ISMS day at the Renaissance, the hotel in the Renaissance Center, and just an amazing fun company. My last book, Practically Radical, I spent a lot of time and came to deeply admire the Henry Ford Health System here in town and watched what they did out in West Bloomfield. I've spent a bunch of time in Grand Rapids at community events and marvel at the sort of intersection of business and the arts and philanthropy, lots of stuff going on there. So that's all not to mention the downtown entertainment scene. It's all a preamble to the following. I think, and I listened with interest to Doug's remarks, I really think Michigan is in the really interesting spot where, on the one hand, there is so much substance in this place. Decades and decades of knowledge and mastery of technology and industry-specific knowledge about, it's not just cars, it's transportation and logistics, and you're the Silicon Valley of office furniture, and all these fields, which are, mobility is a field of the future. Understanding the future of work is one of the most compelling parts of design. So you have got here all of the technology, the skills, the substance, the blood, sweat, and tears of really understanding this stuff. I mean, very few states have that. And I think the opportunity is to goes back to that paradox of expertise. Make sure that all that valuable stuff you have becomes a platform for an unleashed sense of imagination and innovation. And so if more and more of these sorts of events, you can mix the young crowd with the grizzled veterans, and you can revel in the skills and the capacities that has taken decades and decades to develop, and other places can't go off and do that, but then match that with a sense of just creativity and blue sky thinking and so on. I think Michigan is just in a great position to really help lead a lot of the industries of the future. And that combination of genuine expertise, which is very hard to come by, and a spirit of imagination, it's not around everywhere. And I think every time I come here, I see that going on, because I'm dealing with both sides of that equation. So I'm personally, what do I know, but I'm personally kind of excited about the future of this place.
When's the last time you did something new for the first time?
Oh my God, what do you give me? God, you expect me to walk the talk? That's outrageous. I'm a very, it's funny, I write all this stuff about change, sort of. I'm a very conservative person in terms of how I live my life. I'm very slow to adopt new technologies. I'm kind of set in my ways like everybody else. But every so often I do try to force myself to go above and beyond. So starting about 2 years ago, I started hearing all about quote unquote augmented reality, not just virtual, but the idea that you could, you go through life and whatever it is with your avatars, all that stuff, you sort of present yourself in ways that are bigger, richer, different, oftentimes fabrications of who you really are. But that kind of the future is this thing of, and it's one of these things where you hear that same phrase enough times. So I again, against my better judgment, against every fiber of my being, I went to this big freakazoidal conference in Las Vegas about augmented reality. I've never felt more out of place. I mean, I'm like, who are you people? What do you? But you spend a day and then you spend a second day and you still don't really understand it. But you get a sense for kind of the trajectory of that sort of space and why you actually have to. I mean, my initial inclination every time I hear the latest technology, but it's just like, please, turn off the lights. I just can't handle it anymore. Because technology, more than any industry, I think, is one that lurches from one buzzword to the next. And some of them, like cloud computing, suddenly take over the world. Others are the flavor of the year for 2012, and you never hear about them again. So you have to have a certain dose of healthy skepticism. But anyway, I think one of the things I do is try to physically, personally, put myself in situations where I'm rubbing up against and encountering people with whom I have very little in common, who live their lives in ways that are totally foreign to me, because that's how I learn the most. I mean, you talk to any educator, and they will. And I know there's some university presidents in the room. I had a lovely chance to meet them. We learn the most when we encounter and engage with people who are the least like us. And yet in business, I mean, it's not a criticism. We spend most of our time with people who are exactly like us, people who work at our company, people who are, if we're marketers, we're hanging out with marketers. If we're engineers, we're hanging out, people who live in the same neighborhoods we live in. And it kind of does take a certain willing suspension of disbelief to kind of transport yourself so that you're up with folks who are really unlike you. So that's one technique I use. I find it helps me learn a lot very quickly.
Right. How do you define talent? Training, teaching, and learning are all really costly. How do you know you're investing in the right people? A lot of the stories you told are about companies that are investing.
So I had a great, Tom Crosby, he's really kind of a Southern, hail fellow, well met, doesn't look like any razzle-dazzle innovator, but he's a CEO of PALS. I asked him, I said, look, 120 hours, every day you're retraining. What if you spend all that time and money and these people leave? Because the turnover rate in the fast food business is 200% a year. I mean, it's just astronomical. And he kind of looks at me very seriously. He says, I'm thinking about it the other way. What if we don't spend all that time and money and the people stay? And I think that's actually a really, it's a really, really good way of thinking about it, which is if you create an environment where people feel like we're always learning, we're always growing, we're getting better and better at our jobs, it takes money, it takes time. It turns out it probably takes more time than money. I find a lot of these things, a lot of the really compelling ideas I see about how to build companies or build cultures, people want to green eye shade it to death and so on. It turns out it doesn't cost a lot of money to interview your best people and come up with an interesting series of questions to ask. I mean, it just actually takes thinking of that in the first place and having the discipline to actually do it. But it turns out you do that and your turnover rates become incredibly low. This is a company, the general manager, the person who runs one of the locations, they have lost seven in 33 years of operation. In the last 33 years, 7 general managers have left. Not 7%, 7. Their turnover among assistant managers is 1.4% a year. This becomes, oddly enough, a job for life, and in an industry that's famous for people, jumping around at the. So, to me, it's all about creating environments where people say, I'm eager to get to work, I'm learning so much from the people around me, I feel like I'm growing and evolving as a person. And I think that takes less money than it takes real creativity and discipline to say, the human side of enterprise is just as important as technology, just as important as finance, just as important in M&A, and just as rigorous, by the way. And I don't think most companies really abide by that. And those that do, I think, really get huge rewards for doing it.
Okay, I'm getting the big red screen that says time's up. Right. So thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for putting up with me. Appreciate it.